Is it true that many men feel lost in this world? If so, why? I think it's a loss of purpose. For a long time, there was a default purpose. Be the breadwinner. Keep the farm running. Protect and provide for your wife and children. Well, there's a huge disconnect between the sexes now. 45% of women are projected to be single and childless in 2030. There's a lot that goes into statistics like that. For one, women have way more financial independence now. I mean, women weren't legally allowed to have single bank accounts until the 70s. So women don't need a man to provide for them. So they don't have to settle for less than they want. I think this is great. I'd rather people not be in relationships they don't want to be in. But while there have been tons of conversations on where this dynamic leaves women and how to move forward, there hasn't been this dialogue for men. That default purpose I mentioned at the top is still there. And most people, for whatever reason, have a hard time giving themselves a purpose. I don't relate at all. But whatever. Religion also gives a purpose. But that's on the downhill too. So there's all these men who have no idea what to do with their lives. They don't have a purpose. The default doesn't work, yet they're pressured to do it anyway. But women are necessary for that and non-compliant. Which again, I think is good. People like Andrew Tate double down on the default message. He is teaching men how to fulfill their expected role. And because women just aren't that interested in marriage anymore, Andrew Tate and his followers are trying to overcome that by being such manly men women biologically have to get with them. No, it doesn't work and it's a stupid idea. But they're desperate. But when one side takes away the default purpose you've been told all your life and replaces it with nothing, and the other tells you that you can fulfill it if you do what they say, the latter is a way better sales pitch. It's also easy to frame it as women being evil. So that gives them a scapegoat for problems. I don't know the fix to all this. I know there's many problems. Like the default societal viewpoint being that men's emotions have less weight than women's, while also giving more weight to men's desires than women's. Chill. I know there's issues on both sides. Or how to talk about men's issues. I have to keep restating that I know women have issues to prevent people from just assuming I'm a misogynist. Men figuring out a purpose outside of women would be swell. But for now it relies upon the individual. And most people aren't wired that way. One thing I will say is that progressive people need to start having empathy for men's issues. A woman YouTuber, Shoe0nhead, made a video on men's loneliness. She made a follow-up video on all the hate she received, with people saying they're glad men are lonely, that men are lonely for being terrible people, that if men just stopped the patriarchy they wouldn't be lonely, etc. And that is a thing with progressive people. It often is about oppression politics. Who is oppressing who? And how do we stop that? It's excellent for women, LGBTQ+ people, POC, etc. But when people who are a part of that oppressor class are killing themselves at such a high rate, who are depressed and lonely with no community to turn to, oppression politics can't help. And like, your average millennial or Gen Z guy isn't trying to get an oppressor. You can argue he still benefits from that system and you'd be right. But acting as though it's the fault of the average guy doesn't reflect reality and just pushes men into the arms of Andrew Tate even more. As a man who feels lost, yes. Because our problems are constantly lumped in with and labeled manosphere, red pill content. This stuff is popular because they're the only people listening to and talking to these lost men. Everyone else largely ignores men's issues or straight up labels them as an attack on another group. Right here on Reddit, search for posts that ask, "What do you think of men's rights groups?" The responses overwhelmingly prove my point. A lot of young men in particular probably feel lost due to a combination of factors. 1. They are more removed from social interactions due to social media and dating apps. 2. The economy has been in a downturn for years. Men have been told that they derive value from providing for a family. And as a result, many men don't measure up financially. 3. Men and boys are taught to be stoic and not burden others with their feelings. And in a social media era with increasing isolation, it becomes harder to share how you feel with others. 4. A lot of women on dating apps and social media have long lists of what they expect from men, including minimum height requirements, $100,000 salaries, and a minimum size between the legs. 5. Men are afraid to talk to or approach women so as to not be called a creep or accused of harassing her. It contributes to male loneliness. 6. Red pillars and black pillars end up being some of the few people who actually want to talk to men. And often their advice leads to more loneliness and unhappiness. 7. When men talk about their issues, feminists will be quick to remind them that women have it worse, and that men are to blame for their own problems due to patriarchy and toxic masculinity. 8. Many men who've tried to talk to wives or girlfriends about their problems have ended up having their vulnerabilities used against them or simply been left. As men, it's rare to find someone who'll genuinely listen to your problems without judgment and won't blame you for it afterwards. We're held accountable for things that are outside of our control all the time because of male privilege. When we point out that most homeless people are men, that most people who commit suicide are men, that most dropouts from higher education are men, that most work-related deaths are men, and that men are more lonely than women, people usually just revert to "man up. It's not our problem. Blame the patriarchy," or "it's toxic masculinity," with no solution in sight. Life in general is absurd. Many people come to this realization and then look for something to help give it more meaning. Some of those people turn to red pill or incel groups for support, or a crass materialism that only focuses on money and income. As with all false prophets, they promise easy answers to complex questions, which is seductive. They feel lost because they are lost, as we all have been since we ate from the tree of knowledge. I feel unwanted by women, but not really lost in general. I'm not a woman hater or anything, but they don't seem to want me. I fully think it's me, not them. I forget the comedian who had a bit about this. Maybe someone will remember. But in a lot of ways, men are treated as disposable in this society. Men disproportionately die more at war, work in dangerous jobs, spend more time in jail, do worse in school, are more likely to die via suicide, lose time with their children when there is a divorce, etc. In reality, it's always been that way. However, on top of that, today there is a barrage of messaging via the culture that they are toxic abusers whose society was made for. So now not only are some of those things true for men who work a dangerous job, don't get to see their kids, etc., but also get to have society blaming them more than ever. Lost may be a strong word, but frustrated seems appropriate. This was my comment from a similar question. In a nutshell, for me, you're supposed to want kids, but not be around kids. But if you are, then you're just babysitting while mom takes a break. But if you're babysitting, don't look at any other children, because then other kids, moms, might get creeped out. But you better keep an eye on your own children and keep them in line. But don't discipline them too harshly, because then you're probably an abusive parent. So be affectionate, but not too affectionate, because then you're weird. This pretty much applies to all facets of life. Be a man, but not too much, unless it's appropriate. Until it's not, suck it up and take it like a man. But don't bottle up your feelings. But quit your whining. We live in a society with no clear definition of proper masculinity. The old definitions are either dead or impossible, and while they weren't particularly good definitions, they were a ruler by which a man could judge himself. The new ones are confused, contradictory, and often vilifying. So yeah, a lot of boys and young men are lost. The red pill, POA, MGTOW are appealing because they're simple and concrete. They also allow young men to place blame on others. I don't agree with the manosphere stuff and don't blame anyone, but I absolutely feel lost, very nihilistic. Don't see the point in engaging with society the way I'm supposed to. I also feel like the future is bleak with climate change and the current direction my country is going. Canada, where housing is getting crazy expensive and oligarchs control things like our cell networks and food. Being told masculinity is toxic without any kind of follow-up on how to encourage positive masculinity does not help. Yeah, it's true. Why? Too deep to discuss on Reddit. People are too fragile and set in their ways and will only see attacks on any opinion you form on it here on the internet. It's not something you can just go into and answer with a paragraph. And if you try, you'll just get jumped by the mentally adult thinking you are X, Y, or Z for making such a horrible statement. Whatever it is, it's not worth bringing up around the immature. And the internet is for everybody. Our patriarchal and capitalistic society pushes the idea that every man must be individualistic and is responsible entirely for his own well-being. Humans are social creatures. We are literally made to rely on each other collectively. But our society's values directly oppose our evolutionary nature. It feels bad to be forced to be self-reliant, because as a species we aren't supposed to be self-reliant, which causes a lot of men to feel isolated and deeply unhappy. But many young men aren't equipped to understand why they feel so unhappy. And that leaves the door open for red pill influencers to take advantage of their need for human connection and understanding. The lack of love for me makes me feel lost. Love is a big part of who I am, and without it I am truly lost, that I can't see the woods for the trees. Have you ever seen or read Fight Club? That story does a good job of summing up why so many modern men feel unsatisfied and lost in their lives. Especially in that scene where Tyler Durden was going on about how older generations had great wars to fight in and the promise of having a nice house and a family if they worked hard. We have nothing to rally behind. Our lives usually don't turn out as we'd hoped, and us regular people stay broke while the rich get richer. It just seems like society continues to get worse and worse, and all of us regular people are screwed. No matter how hard we try to do well at our jobs or make meaningful connections with people. That being said, it's even sadder when people buy into the BS that these online gurus try to peddle, instead of seeing that those guys are just profiting off of their rage. I guess that's easier for them than accepting that nobody has the answers to magically turn your life around. You want it simple. 40 years ago a man could go to college or start working, and he could buy a house or an apartment on his own. Now the entry level is to grind life so hard as to throw yourself into a pit of mental anguish. They forget that you could just work 40 hours and go home. I'm not sure it's a man problem as much as it is a victim identification problem. There are so many opportunities through social media to find a support group and identity by blaming someone else for your issues. Maybe your parents were narcissists. Maybe that Asian kid took your spot at an Ivy League. Maybe you'd have a girlfriend if women weren't so woke. Maybe you'd have a career path if boomers hadn't pulled up the ladder. Life is not easy or fair. We all throw our pity parties. What's new emo is the constant, instant reinforcement. feel bad or insecure, seek out polarized content, turn that hurt into anger. It can have the effect of a drug. People need more and more content to get the same level of hate buzz. For so long, women were stuck in the stereotypical role of housewife and mother. Attached to her husband, men felt a sense of pride and got their self-value from their ability to provide for a family and bring a paycheck. With the liberation of women, and their excelling at work and education, a paycheck alone isn't sufficient anymore. Sorry to say. With the advent of the internet and more in-person social isolation, most young men these days aren't as socially developed and independent as women in many cases. So many are struggling to find themselves and don't know what to do. Men today are told simultaneously that they must succeed to avoid being an incel loser, but that their success in a capitalist system is toxic and likely means they've stepped on a minority along the way. Women really need to become more aware of the double standards they hold and try to resolve them. It's not okay for you to complain about how men have this or that unfair privilege in public but then go after the richest, best man you can find in private for sex and relationships. Your hypocrisy is harmful to society in a real way. Because the culture of women has changed and they're struggling to adapt.
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. Epic Haircast is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.